Hi there, and welcome to the first Frog Month Victoria webinar. My name is Justine Holmes, and I'm the State Coordinator for Estuary Watch and Water Watch, and I'm based at Corangamite Catchment Management Authority. Today I'll start by going through this project. Then we'll hear from frog ecologist Professor Kirsten Paris from University of Melbourne on why frogs are important and why we're interested in the Growling Grass Frog. And then we're going to hear from Jane Petch, an ecologist based at Melbourne Water, and she's going to walk us through how Melbourne Water have used their frog data in the past, and then she'll show us how to use the Frog Census App. And I'm going to begin by acknowledging that I work at Corangamite Catchment Management Authority, and we work on the lands, waters and seas of the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation and the Kiwaiwurrung, Jagardwurrung, Gulidjan and the Gadabunud people of the Maar Nation and acknowledge them as the traditional owners. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and I'm currently coming to you from Wadawurrung land in Torquay. And a little bit of housekeeping, this webinar will be recorded and then we'll post it on the Frog Month Victoria website. Zoe, if I could get you to post that website link in the chat, that would be a great help. You also would have noticed that the cameras and mics are turned off, and that's just so we can run the session smoothly because we have quite a few people tuned in today. Now, if you have questions, if you can just type them into the chat and we'll do our very best to get to them at the end of the session. We have about 15 to 20 minutes for questions at the end. So how did we get to Frog Month Victoria? I work with about 13 staff from across Victoria, and we're mostly working as Estuary Watch and Water Watch project officers, and most of these people are based in catchment management authorities in citizen science roles. And a few of these people working out of the CMAs, Melbourne Water and Merri Creek Management Committee have been wondering how to run a Frog Month program with their volunteers and communities. And I thought this was a great opportunity to have a coordinated state approach. We also have the University of Melbourne's Professor Kirsten Paris helping with the data reporting, and so she'll be presenting shortly. We have Melbourne Water who have kindly partnered with us to help use their Frog app, and they're going to provide us the data in a timely way. And we have the CMAs and Merri Creek Management Committee who are promoting this project through their networks. A little summary of the project. So we're starting off as a pilot project for the month of October. So we want you to go out and monitor frogs in your local area, and we're particularly interested in knowing if there are growling grass frogs around. So all going well, we'd like to go back out in April with a focus on Viburn's Toadlet. So this data that will be collected will be made available to CMAs. And then they can use this information or data to inform management decisions regarding the conservation and habitat of frogs. So once the CMAs have the data, we'll also be making it available to the volunteers who have participated with any actions that have been taken because of their work. So this is a core principle of citizen science. We want to make sure that we're looping the information back to citizen scientists and volunteers so they know how their time and data have been used. And to keep you up to date with anything that's happening with the project, I'll get Zoe again to post a link in the chat to the Frog Month Victoria newsletter. And if you'd like to sign up to that, I can send you out the reports that are written and updates on the data that has been collected. So I'm going to attempt to run a poll now, first time ever. So you have to bear with me. Let's see if I can do this. All right. I'm interested to find out what catchment you're from. And if I launch this, there should be a multiple choice poll that comes up on the screen now. And if you don't know what catchment you're in, there is a button at the bottom that you can select that says not sure. A lot of people from Corangamite CMA. Lots from Melbourne Water. Where's Skippy coming in? Thank you very much to everybody for responding. That's very interesting for us to know where you're coming from. What I might do now is I'm going to hand over to Professor Kirsten Paris, who's going to talk us through a little bit more about the growling grass frogs and why frogs are fabulous.
Thanks, Justine. It's lovely to be here and lovely to talk frogs, one of my favourite topics. A little bit about me. I'm a professor of urban ecology at the University of Melbourne, based in the School of Biosciences. And I've been studying frogs for many years now. I started my PhD back in the 1990s, looking at stream breeding frogs in subtropical forests of Eastern Australia, so much further north than we are now, up in Queensland and northern New South Wales. And I've combined my love of frogs with my love of urban environments and how we can support nature in our cities to be where I am today. So a little bit more about frogs. Frogs are great, and I assume most of you are on this webinar today here because you do like frogs, and they're a really interesting part of our biodiversity. Amphibians were the first land vertebrates, so they evolved from fish back in the Devonian period, so many hundreds of millions of years ago. So they've been here a long time, and they've evolved to cover pretty much most habitats across the planet. In Australia, we have approximately 250 recognised species of frogs, and within Victoria, we have 38. And some of them live in our highest alpine areas, and others go all the way out to the Mallee regions, the drier desert parts of the state. So pretty much everywhere you go, you can find frogs. Our frogs display a range of life histories, which basically means they approach breeding and reproduction in different ways. The classic way that frogs breed is that they lay eggs in a water body, and that might be a stream, a pond, a little ditch, a farm dam, or a billabong, for example. And then they have free swimming tadpoles that will hatch out of the eggs. They go through an aquatic tadpole phase, then they change or metamorphose into juvenile frogs, and they leave the water body. But we also have frogs who do things a bit more trickily, do things differently, and that includes Bibron's toadlet that Jane will talk about in a little while. Another interesting thing about frogs is they don't all breed at the same time of year. They divide up the calendar year amongst themselves, so not everybody is trying to breed in the same place at the same time. And this leads to seasonal calling patterns. Our focus on October is really for spring breeding frogs and for those who like to call in the warmer months of the year, such as growling grass frog. They'll kick off in spring and then go through the summer as well. Now, I've been studying frogs for a long time, and during my PhD, I collected large amounts of data myself. But that type of fieldwork is really quite time-consuming and expensive, and there are a lot of places that we as scientists just can't get to. So that is one of the reasons why it's so great to partner with the participants who are keen to be part of our citizen science endeavour, because the data you collect is really helpful for me as a researcher, but also for Justine and her teams across the CMAs, and for Jane and her group at Melbourne Water. You're going to be our eyes and ears, particularly our ears, during October, Frog Month, and we're hoping that if we engage folks from all the catchments across Victoria, we can start to gather information on where our frogs are persisting and where perhaps they are doing less well. This frog here is the southern brown tree frog, Loria ewingi, and it's a bit of an urban survivor frog. This is what it sounds like. Hopefully you can hear that sound coming through loud and clear. And Loria ewingi is a winter to spring breeder. So it will kick off in July-ish, but still calling at the moment. And out of interest, there are southern brown tree frogs that live in the garden just behind me in my picture. This is the system garden at the University of Melbourne Parkville campus. So for Frog Month, we're really keen to get any records of any frogs from anywhere in Victoria. We'd love you to go to your local wetland or stream or farm dam and do some recordings for us of any species. But saying that, we have 2 focal species for our Frog Month of October. And the first of these is Loria rhiniformis, the growling grass frog. This species is endangered, considered as vulnerable across Australia and endangered in Victoria. And we've seen extensive population declines of this species in recent decades, caused by a range of factors, including disease. The introduced chytrid fungus in particular is a problem for this species, but we've also seen widespread habitat loss, and the habitat that remains is often quite isolated by development. So frogs might be persisting in one place, but they can't easily get over to visit their friends at other wetlands, and this is when we see problems. Thanks, Julia. So for the growling grass frog, we know that there are still some populations in the Greater Melbourne region, and there are some down in Western Victoria, around Portland and Warrnambool, and we know there are some in Central Victoria around Bendigo. But for the rest of the state, we're really not sure how this species is going and where we can still find populations. So that's what we're really keen for you to help us find out. And this is its famous growly call. Why it's called the growling grass frog. They're quite distinctive. Our second feature species is Loria phelix, the Eastern Dwarf Sedge Frog. And this is an interesting frog because it's not actually considered to be native to Victoria. It's very common in Queensland and in New South Wales, but it's been introduced to Victoria through banana boxes and other produce. So it hitches a ride in the boxes of bananas that come down, or other fruit, or sometimes on potted plants. Say if you're buying palms from your nursery, you might be buying some Loria phelix as well, just unexpectedly. So interestingly, this species one might expect to be subtropical given its native range, but it has established populations in at least 2 parts of Victoria. There are a couple around Melbourne, particularly in the east and southeast of Melbourne, but also interestingly in northeastern Victoria around Yackandandah, which is quite a cold place in the winter and a much colder place than I would expect a subtropical frog to be able to persist. So our questions for this species are, where is it? Do we have other populations of this introduced species that we currently are unaware of? And we're really keen to find out about that. But generally speaking, all the frogs, we want to know where they are and what's calling in your neighbourhood. So thank you very much for being interested in participating. Thank you, Justine.
Thanks, Kirsten. Those calls are so loud. Love them. I'm glad that you had them in the presentation. We'll hand over to Jane Petch now, who's from Melbourne Water, and she's going to talk to us about how Melbourne Water have used their frog data and also walk us through how, there go the frogs, and walk us through how to use the Frog Census App. Thanks, Jane.
Thank you, Justine, and hello everyone. Thanks very much for joining us this afternoon. This is a chance for you to learn a little bit about how you can contribute to protecting frogs and their habitat. So what I'm going to do today is walk you through how to use the app. But first I wanted to give you a couple of examples of how the app has been used and the data gathered by citizen scientists has been used to guide the management of waterways. I'm coming to you today from Wurundjeri country, and I would just like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and also to acknowledge any traditional owners that may be part of the webinar today. So I've got a few slides that are going to help illustrate what I'm talking about. So the first example that I wanted to give you is about southern toadlet. So Kirsten mentioned earlier Bibron's toadlet. So the southern toadlet is essentially a cousin of the Bibron's toadlet, and an interesting frog species because they're an autumn breeding frog that actually lay their eggs in depressions or gullies on the ground, and when rain arrives, those eggs get washed into a larger water body. So that's what these images are showing here. So these southern toadlet are now listed as endangered in Victoria, and I guess part of the reason for that is their very specific habitat and weather requirements that make this frog quite susceptible to land change. So there's a group of citizen scientists who have been monitoring southern toadlet populations since about 2009. And in 2017, they noticed a significant decline in the numbers of southern toadlets calling. And this information triggered a bit of a monitoring blitz by Melbourne Water. So we wanted to look into what was going on to see if we could find out what was happening with these populations. So comprehensive surveys were carried out to identify the key habitat for these frogs, and we partnered with a number of other organisations, including DECA, Parks Victoria and local councils, to try and work out what we could do to protect important habitat for these frogs. So these works are ongoing today. So we are still working on enhancing and protecting habitat for southern toadlet so that hopefully we can prevent them from becoming extinct. So my second example is around the lower billabongs of the Yara River. So we've got an image here showing the billabongs. So these billabongs receive water as part of the Yara River's environmental entitlement to water. So that's what we call, often referred to as e-water. So water is applied to the billabongs, and that is important because it stimulates a lot of biological activity within the wetlands, within the billabongs. So frogs are a key species in the lower Yara billabongs, and there are about 10 species of frogs historically recorded in this area. So the information gathered using the Frog Census App has been used to assist with the environmental watering program in the billabongs. The recordings and data collected by citizen scientists has helped to guide the application of environmental water to ensure that the water was applied at the right time and in the right quantity to stimulate frog breeding activity. And you can see the picture in the right here shows frog spawn in one of the billabongs. So there was quite active breeding in response to the environmental water that was applied to the billabongs. So that's just another way that this data that you're collecting helps to guide the management of our waterways. So it's a critical kind of feedback loop in what we do as we manage our waterways in the urban area. So what I'm going to do now is talk to you about how to use the Frog Census app to capture records of frogs calling, but the app is very easy to use, so I'm probably going to give you a little bit more kind of in-depth information that hopefully will help to make sure that you can capture some really great frog records for us. And these slides are a bit boring, but they'll help to illustrate what I'm talking about. So if you haven't already downloaded the Frog Census app, it's freely available in the App Store. And once you open up the app on your phone, this is the first screen that you're going to see. And the big red button in the center there is the way that you start recording the frogs that you hear calling. And as I say, it's a stepwise process to capture that recording and very easy to use. Now, the process of capturing the recordings relies on the GPS data that comes from your phone. Now, often people don't like to use the location services in their phone. So what you can do is select to just use location services only while you're using the Frog Census app. And it's very easy to set that up if you go into the settings of your phone and select from the list of apps the Frog Census app. And you can see on the screen on the left-hand side there, I've selected to use location services only while using the app. And the other thing that I found in my phone is that there's an option to select to use a precise location, and that I've turned that on. It's very important that we accurately capture where the records are coming from, because what we're gathering is essentially research grade data. So we want to make sure that we know accurately where you have found these frogs. So that's how you go about setting up your location services. So this is the screen that you'll see on the left-hand side once you begin a recording. So the maximum length for recordings is 5 minutes, but you don't need to record for that long unless you're doing a formal kind of monitoring program where you're going back to the same site and repeatedly monitoring. Otherwise, you can just allow the recording to run for a sufficient length of time to capture all the frogs that you hear recording. And then if you look at this screen on the right-hand side, you'll see at the top of the app, the steps are clearly identified 1 through 4. So as I say, the app is very easy to use because it just steps you through the process of capturing the record. So once you have made your recording, you can then use the next button at the bottom right-hand there to proceed to the next screen, which looks like this. So the next thing to do is to work on your location. So I always use the first option, which is called use my current location. And when you click that, you'll see you get a latitude and longitude for your location, which you can see on the screen here. Now, the second thing to do is just to check that that is an accurate record of where you're positioned. So I then use the bottom selection there and look at the map, which will give you a screen like this, and you'll see a dropped pin for your location. Now, what you can do, if that drop pin is not 100% accurate, you can just drag it slightly to adjust your location so that we're accurately capturing that record. It's very simple to do. So once we have got our location sorted out, we then want to fill in some details. So the first thing to do is give your location a title. So ideally we want to use something that's descriptive because that's useful when we look into the data later on to have a good description of what the site is. And it's also going to jog your memory too if you're going back to the same site more than once. That site name will help you there as well. So, for example, I might go to Willsmere Billabong in Kew and collect a record there. So I'd use that as my location. The next thing to do is to select the species that are calling. Now, you don't need to be daunted by this because it doesn't matter if you can't recognize the frogs. The bottom option is allows you to select unknown species. So you just tick each of these circles to indicate the species that you can hear calling. You can have a bit of a guess and train yourself to learn how to recognize frogs. And equally, you can submit a null record. So if you go to a site and notice that there are no frogs calling, where in the past you have heard them calling, you can then select the no frog option. The next thing to add in is the number of frogs calling. So again, it's just an approximation to give us some idea of how much activity is happening at your location. Last of all, we want to put in some details into your record. So it's good to identify where you are recording. Is it a wetland? Is it a garden pond? Maybe it's a dam, or it could be a ditch on the side of the road. But those kind of descriptive characters are really important to help build a picture of where we're seeing frog activity. You might also like to record some weather information. If it's rained within the last 24 hours, for example, that is kind of useful information as well. Once you've done all of those steps, you can then hit the submit button, which is in the bottom right hand side there, and your record will then be added to the database. Now, when your record is added to the database, you'll see it immediately on the map. So you can look at the map function at the bottom of the screen there. Your record will appear as soon as you have submitted it. It will be identified with an orange or yellow circle and a question mark. And that's because all the records that you submit go to an ecologist who listens to the recording and verifies the species that you've captured. Once that process has happened, that orange circle will change to a green tick icon so that you know that your record has then been verified. So that way you can learn about whether you've identified the species correctly or not, and continue to build up your skill set as you go collecting records. Now, the other thing that I just wanted to let you know is that you don't actually need to use your mobile data while you're out in the field if you don't want to. The recording and the report that you capture while you're out in the field is saved automatically onto your phone. So if you turn your mobile data off, you can then choose to submit that report once you have Wi-Fi, maybe when you get back home. So you'll see on this screen various icons on the left. So this is a list of my reports. And you can see that the reports with the tick have been submitted. This one here still needs some editing. And this one here has been saved to my phone but has not yet been submitted. So it's important to make sure that once you get back home, you then submit that record so that it will then appear in the map. So every now and again, I do just go in and check my reports to make sure that I haven't got any sitting there that I haven't yet submitted. So once you go onto the map function, as I said before, you'll see your record immediately. You can see all of your reports by selecting My Reports, and you can also use the filter function within the app to select certain time period, or maybe a certain species that you might be interested in. So you can filter down the data, and you can then send yourself an email of that filtered data if you want to, so that the data is always there and available for you, and very accessible. So the last thing I just wanted to go through was just a few pro tips to help with capturing your record. So it's always a good idea to check the weather conditions before you head out, because you want to make sure that you're going out when the conditions are ideal for frogs to call. Ideally, temperatures over about 12 degrees, so milder evenings when the wind is light. Frogs are more likely to be calling, and also after rain, they're most likely to be calling as well. So once you arrive to your site where you want to make your recording, it's a good idea to just stand still and wait for about 5 minutes. And this gives the frogs a chance to get used to the fact that you are there, and begin their regular calling patterns again. Also, while you're standing there waiting, you can check and see how many different frogs you can hear calling, so that you make sure that you capture all of those species once you start your recording. That will determine how long you might want to record for. It's also a good idea to try to position yourself so that you're blocking most of the external noise like wind or traffic, with your back to the wind, and that way you'll capture the best quality sound possible. So that's going to be kind to our ecologist ears, who are going to sit and listen to all of those records, and they will then report back with the verified species that you've captured. And it takes between 2 and 4 weeks for the ecologists to go through all of the recordings that are submitted and to verify them. That will depend a little bit on the volume of calls that are coming through. And October is usually a very busy month for frog recording because there's lots of activity during spring. So the other thing that happens with your data, so not only is it available through the app that you can search it and access it in the app, but we also submit all of that data to the Atlas of Living Australia and the Victorian Biodiversity Atlas. So that means that the data that we are collecting is then publicly available for any land managers, any researchers, or any students who might be interested in the data. So we really are contributing research grade data that's publicly accessible to everyone, which is going to help, as I say, for the protection of frog species and their habitat, hopefully into the future. So I'm really looking forward to seeing all your reports flood in over the next month, and happy frogging, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. I think, I'm not sure if you went through it, Kirsten, but is there a way to specifically go out and monitor for growling grass frogs?
Thanks, Justine. I remembered that I had meant to mention that. So because growling grass frog like warmer conditions, and they'll often start calling in spring, but the peak of their calling may be in summer, I would focus on warmer evenings than 12 degrees. So ideally 20 degrees or above. And it doesn't necessarily have to be associated with rain, but warmer evenings and less windy conditions are good for recording, as Jane mentioned. The other thing to note with all our frogs is that they don't just call nonstop all the time throughout their breeding season. Calling is actually very energetically expensive, and a male frog can't call all night, every night for weeks at a time. They have to take breaks. So that means we have a situation where, also combined with changing weather conditions, we have something known as imperfect detectability. So a frog species might be present at one of these locations, but you may not detect it just by going once or twice. So as a general rule of thumb, visiting 3 times or more during the specified breeding season is a good way to be confident that something is absent if you haven't found it in those 3 visits. Yes, so if you're really keen to help us out with our focal species, Growling Grass Frog or Loria phelix, the Eastern Dwarf Sedge Frog, multiple visits to a site throughout October would be really helpful.
Thank you, Kirsten. And there was one other thing I wanted to add. I think in this box on this screen here where we're recording, getting you to add a little bit of extra information, if you notice any frog eggs in the water, or if you notice frogs mating, that would be really helpful if you could add it in this box at the bottom that says, oh, my eyesight is terrible. Does that say comments at the bottom? All right, it says comments there. So really interested to know if you see any mating frogs, the eggs, and also if you see little frogs, which are technically called froglets. Is that right, Kirsten?
They have different names, metamorphs sometimes because they're just metamorphosed, or juvenile frogs. We probably won't see juvenile growling grass frog in October because they will have just kicked off their breeding season. But it's possible people might see other little frogs emerging from other species.
Okay. Thank you, Kirsten. So we're going to switch over to questions, and I can see we've got quite a few coming in, and Zoe Steinbeck from CCMA is going to help us with this. But what I might do is I see there's a lot of questions about Frog ID and what's the difference and why are we using the Frog Census app. And Jane and Kirsten, I think Kirsten's answered a few questions. But for this project, because it's a statewide project for Victoria, we've decided to use the Frog Census app because Frog Census run by Melbourne Water, they will give us the data at the end of the project, so within 2 to 3 months. And we can also have access to where the endangered and threatened species are, and that data will then go to the CMAs, and then they can make decisions around conservation with that data. And you're right, Frog ID is a really good app, but their data is 1 year behind because they have so many people contributing, and they also don't provide, they won't provide us information on endangered or threatened species either. So this is really a localised app, I think, that hopefully will be really suitable for this project in October. Kirsten and Jane, did I miss anything around that question?
No, I think that covers it well. Thanks, Justine.
Yeah.
Stephen,
hopefully the calls are going to be verified, within 2 to 4 weeks. Yeah, so the data's immediately available then. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
We did also have a question from Stephen that just extends on that. Will this data work in with the Frog ID app, or will it be separate?
So I believe that Frog ID also share their data with the Atlas of Living Australia, and that's where this data goes to as well. So it's all ending up ultimately in the one database. Obviously, we don't want to duplicate data though, so it's important that if you're submitting records through the Frog Census, that you don't submit them directly to ALA, because otherwise we would duplicate records.
Great. We had a question from Danny. Is it worth recording photos from prior to October?
For this particular project, for all of Victoria, we are just looking for October. So photos you can upload in October, but also if you're wanting to monitor outside October, you can also upload photos then. But retrospectively, I don't know, is that possible, Jane, to upload photos?
Yes, so when you make your recording, there's an option to take 3 photos. So it's really useful for us to get an image of the site that you're recording from. And you can also capture, if you happen to see a frog, you can also capture that there as well.
Great. We had a question from Ingrid. Do frogs notice or make less noise if you have a barking dog?
I think generally speaking, it's best to go frogging without your pets. Yes, keep the two activities separate because the presence of other species may influence their calling activity.
And there was another one about the app. So Jane, are there frog calls in the app to help ID, or should we use the Frog ID app for that?
Yes, so the app contains information about frog species and the time that they're most frequently or most commonly calling, and also a recording there. So you can use that as well to help train yourself to identify frog calls within the app.
And I'll just put a reminder in there as well. If you don't know what frog it is, or you can't ID it while you're out in the field, you can just put, is it don't know? Is that right? There's a button that says don't know what species it is.
Yeah, unknown species. That's right. Yep. And you've just got to scroll down to the bottom of the selection to find unknown species.
Mm.
There was a question from Alison. Where is the data available for land managers?
So this data will be sent to CMAs once we've collated it all. So it's probably going to be available early next year. That will be sent to CMAs, and I'll be managing that from my end, working with Jane, who'll provide it to me, and then Kirsten will be putting it into a report, and then I'll be sending that out to the CMAs.
But you can also access the data from the Atlas of Living Australia once it's been uploaded to that database, which is publicly available. If you just search that Atlas of Living Australia, you'll find that database as well.
And I'll also mention that once the CMAs have got the data, I want to send out newsletters to everybody who's participated to let you know where the data has gone and if any actions have been taken from the data and anything interesting we've found as well. So yeah, making sure that everyone's got access to it, and Kirsten will help us to interpret that data as well. So it won't just be raw data, it will be hopefully something we can all understand.
Justine, this is possibly one for you from Nicholas. Is there any push or events planned for National Water Week specifically?
There aren't any events that have been planned by myself personally, but there could be events in CMAs across the state. Yes, and someone's saying, what is a CMA? Sorry, I should be saying Catchment Management Authority. So if you check with your local Catchment Management Authority, you will be able to find out if any events are being held.
And Danny asked, this is one for Kirsten, how small are metamorphs?
Depends on the species. If we're considering growling grass frog metamorphs, probably on average 3 centimetres long at this big. But the metamorphs of other frogs, like common eastern froglet, might only be 1 to 1.5 centimetres long. So yeah, it really depends on what frogs we're looking at.
And again for you, Kirsten, from Stephen, locally at Port Arlington, we're concerned about and I'm not going to pronounce this right, but chytrid fungus affecting our growling grass frog populations. Do you have any advice?
Yes, so chytrid is how that's pronounced.
Well,
that's okay. A lot of people find it tricky. It's short for it's a shortened term for the species name of the disease, which causes the disease is chytridiomycosis in its long form. So chytrid's much easier to say. So I did see there's a question coming up about hygiene, and I will get to that too. Thanks, Britt. So what you can do about growling grass frog and chytrid is if you have the opportunity to alter the habitat slightly where the frogs are living and make opportunities for the frogs to bask in the sun. And it's interesting, growling grass frogs are one of our most active species during the day. Most of our frogs will hide away and only come out in the evenings, but growling grass frog will bask in the sun, and that actually helps them to throw off a chytrid infection, because once the temperature gets above about 25 degrees Celsius, it will kill the chytrid spores. So if you can set out some flat rocks in the sun near the wetland and provide basking opportunities, that can help. Also, to make sure that the water body isn't too heavily shaded, because cooler water temperatures will favour the fungus over the frog. And I know Jane's colleagues at Melbourne Water, who are involved in developing new wetlands for growling grass frog, they're also exploring opportunities to make the water, to have some water come from bore water, which is slightly saline. And again, that helps the frogs, but not everyone can do that in their own backyard.
I was just going to add to that too, a little bit of hygiene. So when you are going out to collect frog records, it's important to stick on a made path if there is a path there. We don't want you wading out into the water because it's not safe to do that. And restricting your movement into muddy, wet areas reduces the likelihood of you spreading chytrid fungus on your boots. And we also recommend that you make sure to clean your boots thoroughly between visits to aquatic areas so that you don't contribute to the spread of chytrid fungus. If you go onto the Melbourne Water website, we've got a handbook there which gives you lots of information about collecting frog records and how to follow those hygiene guidelines and make sure you keep your boots, your shoes clean, and some disinfectant that you can use on your footwear.
Keith made a comment about the southern toadlet. I'm not sure, is that a question about sensitivities with some species, perhaps? I'll read what he says. The southern toadlet in Adams Creek does not have exact location as it is under threat from sand mining and do not want miners to destroy their habitat. Are there sensitivities, I think he's asking, around recording locations?
Do you want to tackle that one, Jane?
Yeah, so always when you're going out into the field, you need to be mindful that you are stepping into potential habitat for frogs that breed on the ground. But I think it's important that we identify key habitat areas for these threatened and endangered species, because the only way that we can protect their habitat is by knowing that the frogs are there. So I guess there is to some degree a trade-off there, but when you go out into the environment, you should always be cautious about where you're walking and not trampling all over the area, particularly if it is known habitat for some of those threatened and endangered species. So you can actually look in the app before you head out to find out what species have been recorded in your area so that you can be mindful of those considerations before you head out. Do you want to add anything to that, Kirsten?
I think that the broader question of when we should keep things secret and how is something that would require a long conversation and something that conservation biologists have debated for quite some time. I think if it comes to the report writing, which is what I'll be doing, I may make a judgment that the exact locations of some of the threatened species won't be released in the public report. We'll have that information as the CMAs in Melbourne Water as the land managers, but I won't necessarily say, go to exactly this spot to find this species. We'll average the data up to larger zones, so it's not so identifiable.
And a final question from Ingrid. I also heard about trials of little concrete tunnels to bake themselves a little, I think in Royal Park.
Yeah, there have been some trials of also bricks that have little holes in them, you know, those holy bricks, house bricks. Sometimes the frogs will sit inside those, and it's like a little sauna experience. Again, that allows them to increase the temperature of their skin and benefits them in the fight against the fungal disease.
Wonderful. I think that's it for questions, unless anyone has anything else.
Thanks, Zoe. I think what I'll do is we're about ready to wrap up the presentation, but I'm going to run another poll because we're interested to know where you'll head out to monitor frogs in your area. And I'll see if I can get this up on the screen. And if you can select the circle and press the submit button where you think you'll be monitoring frogs. Not so many backyard ponds. Oh no, here they come. Interesting. Okay, thank you for participating in that poll. And we're pretty much at the end of the presentation. So I would like to thank Kirsten and Jane for presenting in this froggy presentation. And I want to thank all of you for coming along. And if you have any questions, just get in touch with me. My email's on the screen, or you can give me a call. But we're really looking forward to seeing your frog data come through. Don't forget that if you don't hear a frog, that's also considered data as well. So yeah, we look forward to hearing your frog calls, and I'll be sending out reports later on in the year to you, and also making sure that I'm providing these reports to the CMAs so they can make informed decisions around frog conversation. Oh, sorry, Ingrid just said, should we start now or just in October? I mean, I think start in October, but you could go out now and have a little practice now, because I guess that data will still be considered. So thank you very much, and thank you to Zoe for doing the questions, and we'll sign off for now. Have a lovely day. Thank you. See you later.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening.